Federal authorities arrested a man today suspected of mailing at least 13 bombs to high-profile Democrats, including 2 former presidents. One addressed to former CIA Director John Brennan in care of CNN's New York bureau. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Investigators are still finding suspicious packages, 3 more just today, but they believe they have the man responsible for sending them. This afternoon, the FBI director says a single fingerprint led to the arrest of 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc of Aventura, Florida. Before that, many of us watched live as federal agents towed away a white van with windows covered in political stickers that praised President Trump in one way or another and had targets over faces of some of the people who received pipe bombs in the mail. None of those pipe bombs in those packages detonated, but the FBI director said today definitively, while crudely constructed, they were not hoaxes. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said regardless of political beliefs, the department will bring the full force of the law against anyone who resorts to violence to further an agenda. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us with what the president's saying about today's arrest and the fallout from that. But we begin with Chief Intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge with a look at how investigators got their suspect. Good evening, Catherine.
Thank you, Brett, and good evening. Today's announcement is the culmination of a 5-day manhunt that began Monday in the greater New York area and ended 1,000 miles away in South Florida, drawing on more than a dozen federal agencies led by the Secret Service and FBI.
We have arrested Cesar Sayoc in connection with this investigation.
The 56-year-old suspect was arrested in South Florida and is now facing 5 federal criminal counts for sending explosives through the mail and targeting current and former Democratic politicians.
This is utterly unacceptable. Political violence or the threat of violence is antithetical to our vigorous system of self-government.
Federal investigators seized his van, covering it with a blue tarp, concealing pro-Trump stickers. Sayoc's social media accounts also praising Republicans, slamming Democrats, and showcasing videos of himself appearing at Trump rallies. The Attorney General was pressed on why Sayoc singled out Democrats and at least one powerful party donor.
He may have been appears to be a partisan, but that would be determined by the facts.
The break in the case came when an FBI lab identified a latent fingerprint on one of the suspicious package envelopes addressed to Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. 2 additional pieces of DNA evidence from other packages matched Sayoc, who was already in a law enforcement database because of his past criminal activity.
The work of the men and women of law enforcement here and the work that was done over the last week is something that should make every American proud and grateful.
Another device was discovered today in California, addressed to Democratic Senator Kamala Harris, and in New York City addressed to CNN contributor and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. The FBI director emphasized the devices, now more than a dozen, intercepted on the East and West Coast, were dangerous, not a hoax, laying out new details of their construction.
Each device consisted of roughly 6 inches of PVC pipe, a small clock, a battery, some wiring, and what is known as energetic material.
A conviction on the 5 federal criminal charges, which could expand as the investigation progresses, carries a prison term of up to 48 years.
The defendant's conduct as charged is cowardly and reprehensible and totally anathema to our democracy.
In the last few minutes, we have learned that Sayoc will have his first court appearance in Miami on Monday. Earlier, a federal source told Fox that after that initial court appearance in Miami, Sayoc is expected to be transferred to New York City and prosecuted there. Nearly half of the packages were routed through the greater New York City area. Brett.
You know, Catherine, the news conference was pretty detailed. They said that they were still investigating whether he had any help with anybody else. But what else was kind of left out of that?
What we never really got to was the issue of premeditation. Was this something that he did over several weeks himself, so making him a lone actor in this offense, or was it done very quickly, which would suggest that he may have had help from someone who was witting or unwitting in this plot?
Okay, Catherine, we'll follow it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
At this hour, President Trump is making his way to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he is set to speak, as you look live there, at a rally at the top of the hour. Before he left, the president spoke about today's arrest, first praising law enforcement, but also asking that the media start reporting on some of the other big things happening with his administration. administration, especially ahead of the midterm election. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn with more on what the president had to say today. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. As you heard the Attorney General Jeff Sessions say just a moment ago, investigators are still looking into the why of Cesar Sayoc's alleged terror campaign. But now that they have him in custody, President Trump is anxious to get back to the how of trying to hold on to control of Congress and deal with that migrant caravan.
I just want to compliment law enforcement for having done an incredible job.
Departing the White House for a campaign rally in Charlotte, President Trump praised law enforcement for so swiftly apprehending Cesar Sayoc. But he said he did not see the pro-Trump signage on Sayoc's van.
I did not see my face on the van. I don't know. I heard he was a person that preferred me over others, but I did not see that.
Earlier today, the president lamented how the threatening packages have taken the focus off the midterms. In an unusual tweet, almost questioning the degree of the threat, he wrote, "Republicans are doing so well in early voting and at the polls, and now this, quote, bomb stuff happens, and the momentum greatly slows." Late this afternoon, he pulled back a little, admitting the coverage was justified.
All that you people talked about was that, and rightfully so. It was a big thing, rightfully so, but now we have to start the momentum again.
Still, he seemed frustrated that his accomplishments, like the plan announced yesterday to lower prescription drug prices, got short shrift.
And it didn't get the kind of coverage it should have, because it was a big thing.
And he was eager to move on from the suspicious package story.
Now, our law enforcement's done such a good job, so maybe that can start to disappear rapidly because we don't like those stories.
One thing President Trump would like to get back to is the caravan.
I called up the military. This is the military, greatest military in the world. I called up the military. We're not letting them in. They ought to go back now because we're not. Now, do we want them to apply and come in legally? Absolutely.
On the southwest border today, DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen described what the U.S. military's role will be in border enforcement.
We have asked for engineering support, logistics support. Engineering support, of course, it would include vehicle barriers, pedestrian barriers. So we make that request to the Department of Defense.
In addition, the Pentagon will provide planes and helicopters, medical and command and control facilities, and temporary housing for Customs and Border Patrol personnel. The White House is also discussing possible executive or regulatory action to stop illegal migrants in the caravan from either crossing over the border or staying in the United States. A White House official telling Fox News the administration is considering a wide range of administrative, legal, and legislative options to address the Democrat-created crisis of mass illegal immigration.
We are looking at every possible way within the legal construct that we have to make sure that those who do not have a legal right to come to this country do not come in and or are immediately apprehended, detained, and removed.
Sources tell Fox News that no path forward has been determined yet. One of the big points of what I'm told is vigorous discussion is what may or may not be legal. But one thing that the White House does have in its corner this time, if it goes after the migrants, is a 5-4 conservative majority at the Supreme Court. Brett?
John, you heard the president yesterday, today, praising law enforcement, especially today, but he is still hung up on the coverage of this and how it affects him in the coming days ahead of the midterm, isn't it?
Yeah, as we pointed out, the president didn't appear to be personally too happy about the fact that the midterm elections and his campaign and for some very tight races and his prescription drug reduction plan kind of got pushed off the front page. He's doing everything he can now to get it back above the fold. So watch for him tonight in Charlotte, I think, to open up a little more than he did in Mosinee, Wisconsin the other day.
And he also said he didn't have any plans to call Presidents Clinton or Obama.
No, didn't see a reason to.
Okay, John, thanks.
Thank you.
It took investigators less than a week to capture a suspect in this week's suspicious mailings to high-profile Democrats and CNN. Law enforcement, as we just mentioned, receiving praise from all corners tonight. Several viewers asked whatever happened to the investigation into the letters laced with anthrax sent to Capitol Hill and news outlets in 2001. Correspondent Kristen Fisher in our Whatever Happened To series takes a look back at those attacks that killed 5 people and sickened nearly 20 more.
There's no question that anybody who would mail anthrax with the attempt to harm American citizens is a terrorist.
It was the worst act of bioterrorism in U.S. history. As Americans were still reeling from the 9/11 attacks, just 3 weeks later, a photojournalist at the Sun newspaper was killed by inhaling anthrax. It was the first anthrax death in the U.S. in 25 years, and initially the Bush administration thought it was an isolated incident. But that all changed when anonymous letters laced with anthrax began showing up at news outlets in New York and Florida and at the U.S. Capitol.
We'll have enough medicines to treat 12 million Americans for anthrax infections for up to 60 days.
Letters sent to then Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle and Senator Patrick Leahy declared, "You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax." Over the next 2 months, 4 more people would die, including 2 U.S. postal workers, and 17 people would become sick after opening or handling letters that contained the deadly anthrax bacteria. After a massive 7-year investigation involving interviews with more than 9,000 people, the FBI finally declared that they knew who did it.
Based upon the totality of the evidence we had gathered against him, we are confident that Dr. Ivins was the only person responsible for these attacks.
Bruce Edwards Ivins was a government biodefense researcher, and federal prosecutors say they had DNA evidence leading to an anthrax vial in his lab. But Ivins was never charged with any crime because he killed himself in 2008. And so what many consider to be the largest FBI investigation in history ended with no convictions. Bret?
Kristen, thank you. More on today's arrest with the panel in a bit. In other news, the Trump administration is extending an invite to Russian President Vladimir Putin to visit the U.S. early next year. But after what many saw as a disastrous summit between Putin and President Trump in July, and intelligence agencies' confidence that Russia did meddle in the 2016 elections, some in both parties are now wondering aloud if that invite is a good idea. State Department correspondent Rich Edson has our story.
Russian President Vladimir Putin may soon return to the White House.
We have invited President Putin to Washington after the first of the year for basically a full day of consultations.
Traveling in the former Soviet state of Georgia, National Security Advisor John Bolton says officials are still discussing the schedule. Russian state media say Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke today to prepare for meetings between the two presidents. If President Putin accepts the invitation, it would be his first trip to the White House since September 2005. Presidents Trump and Putin last met at a July summit in Helsinki, with a press conference where President Trump discussed Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. election.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
That brought widespread criticism, even among senior congressional Republicans.
Everyone who's dealt with Putin understands fully that the best way to deal with him is through strength. And I just felt like the president's comments made us look as a nation more like a pushover.
Bolton also said the administration wants to maintain discussions with the Russian government on strategic stability, disarmament, and regional conflicts. First, the president may briefly meet again with Putin next month in Paris, while the two are there for the commemoration of the end of the First World War. Bret?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Military leaders from North and South Korea met today to discuss implementing a military agreement aimed at reducing tensions between the two countries. The talks included establishing a joint military committee to help maintain communication and avoid clashes. This is all a part of an agreement reached at a summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in last month in Pyongyang. Up next, a wild ride for Wall Street this week. Some indications from experts on how long that may last. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 41 in Louisville, where a Jeffersontown Kroger reopened today, 2 days after a black man and black woman were killed at that store. Customers who stopped by were able to sign a book of well wishes intended for the victims' families. The shooting is being investigated as a possible hate crime. The suspect is being held on $5 million bond. Fox 7 in Austin, where city officials are hoping to lift a mandatory boil water notice for residents on Sunday. Austin, Texas water officials issued the mandatory notice Tuesday after drinking water quality didn't meet state standards at one plant. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate Fox 5. One of the big stories there in the area tonight. New Jersey health officials are confirming 4 more infected patients in a viral outbreak at a pediatric rehabilitation center that has already killed 7 people. That brings the total number of adenovirus cases to 24. The 7 who died this month were children and at least 1 young adult. They were all in a respiratory unit where patients receive long-term help with breathing. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. The FBI is conducting a criminal investigation into electric car maker Tesla, according to the Wall Street Journal. The newspaper reporting the FBI is looking into whether the company misstated production figures about its Model 3 sedan and misled investors about its business. A Tesla spokeswoman says the company cooperated with a, quote, voluntary request for documents from the Justice Department earlier this year, but has had no additional requests for months. Markets close out a roller coaster week down. The Dow closed 296 points lower after dropping 539 points at its low of the day. The S&P 500 was off 47. The Nasdaq lost 151. For the week, it was ugly. The Dow lost nearly 3%. The S&P plummeted 4%, and the Nasdaq finished down 3 3/4. Let's get some analysis on what is behind this week's market volatility. Susan Lee of the Fox Business Network joins us from New York. Good evening, Susan.
Brett, a day of losses to cap off a long week of volatile trading on the markets. On track now for the worst month for the Dow in 8 years, while the technology-heavy Nasdaq index looking at its worst month since the global financial crisis. And the big drags have been the big Silicon Valley names like Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Facebook, and Netflix. Now, these are the same names that have actually been leading the markets up to record levels this year. There are concerns over higher interest rates, global trade tensions, and fears that corporate earnings might be peaking that have sparked this sell-off. So this week, disappointing earnings and forecasts from Amazon and Google's parent Alphabet. It seemed to confirm the negative market sentiments, but that's not hurting the U.S. economy just yet, because this morning we saw a strong GDP read for the 3 months from June to September, the third quarter as we call it. The U.S. economy growing 3.5%, less than the second quarter of the year, but still better than forecasts, and really puts the U.S. economy on pace for the best year of growth since 2005. That's 13 years. Consumer spending was a bright spot and also important for the U.S. as it powers 2/3 of the economy. Americans are spending at the fastest rate in nearly 4 years, thanks to lower taxes and the best jobs market in close to 50 years. Government spending, including defense, also powering economic growth. But the main drag, housing, falling in the quarter because of higher interest rates and also tax code changes. Housing really important to the U.S. as it accounts for nearly a fifth of the U.S. economy. Brett, back to you.
Hope for a better week next week. Susan, thank you. Have a good weekend. Up next, from the Southwest to the Northeast, to look at some of the competitive races this election season that are actually changing in recent days. We'll bring you that. First, beyond our borders tonight. Weekly protests at the Israeli border leave 2 more dead today. Gaza's health ministry says 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli gunfire during violent demonstrations along the fence. The Israelis have repeatedly warned the Palestinians to stop that violence, throwing stones and firebombs and grenades at Israeli soldiers. It began about 6 months ago. Since that time, 158 Palestinians and an Israeli soldier have been killed along the fence. In Jordan, 20 people are dead from flash floods near the shore of the Dead Sea, and that number could rise. Officials say at least 13 of the victims were middle school students who were taking a break at hot springs when sudden heavy rains sent flash floods toward them. British police have arrested a man suspected of trying to steal one of the 4 surviving Magna Cartas at the Salisbury Cathedral. Police say cathedral alarms sounded Thursday when a person tried to smash the glass box surrounding the document. The Magna Carta, granted by King John in 1215, has become an enduring symbol of the rule of law. Police say the document was not damaged. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. In America's election headquarters tonight, 11 days away from election night, and we're looking at a very tight race that we have talked about before. It's hard to believe, but New Jersey, Bob Menendez, the incumbent Democrat, against Bob Hugin, the businessman Republican candidate. As you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, you see a 7+ point difference. However, that's not the whole story. In fact, it's getting a lot tighter in the internals, so much so that the Cook Political Report today moved this race to a toss-up in Democratic-controlled New Jersey. One of the other indicators that is showing it is very tight is spending. Chuck Schumer, through his Senate Majority PAC, dumping $3 million October 16th. Thursday, another $2.8 million for Menendez to try to shore that up. Now, Hugin is spending a lot of money on ads, a lot of the ads focusing on the corruption trial, the bribery trial that Menendez went through, and using Obama Justice Department documents for those facts. We've been through that, but it is a big issue in this race, and it came up in the debate Wednesday night.
There were sworn FBI affidavits with very specific allegations and corroborating evidence about sexual misconduct. And that when he pushed back on it, the FBI and the Justice Department told him, you are making demonstrably false claims. Those are lies.
Every fact checker has disputed it. Has said it's an outright false. It's a lie, Bob. It's a lie, and you know it's a lie. You know it's a lie. I didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt me. You know it's a lie.
So that issue will likely play all the way to Election Day, and we'll see how tight this actually gets as we head towards Election Day 11 days from now. The other race we're looking at very tightly in the Senate, Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema versus Martha McSally. The Real Clear Politics average has McSally up just slightly over Sinema, but very, very tight, and one in which the vice president is doing some campaigning on that front tonight. Now, if you look at the scenario tonight, this is how it stands. 51-49, Republicans control the Senate. If the election were held tonight, judging by the Real Clear Politics average of polls, even if it's just a slight margin for one or the other, this is how it would go down. Missouri would turn Republican, as would North Dakota, but Nevada, Arizona would stay the same. Florida would stay Democrat, as would Indiana, even though those are very tight races. And there you see the breakdown, 53-47, Republicans picking up 2 seats. You go back to New Jersey, what happens if that moves that direction? 54-46. So that would be a huge pickup for Republicans if it turned out that way. As we go over to the House side, you can take a look at another race that is getting a lot of attention and also the vice president's attention tonight, and that is in New Mexico, an open seat, the Republican Harrell versus the Democrat Small. Very tight, neck and neck. Peter Ducey's traveling with the vice president tonight.
President Trump's proclamation that this is the election of the caravan really matters in New Mexico's 2nd District, which shares a 180-mile border with Mexico.
We have not only, just the national security issue, but we have a number of farmers and ranchers that live right on that border that are only separated with the barbed wire fence.
Yvette Harrell is the Republican running to replace outgoing Republican Steve Pierce and got a visit today from Vice President Mike Pence, who took Air Force 2 to Roswell with a fresh warning to the huge caravan of Central American migrants making their way through Mexico for the U.S.
To those who are in the caravan, we say simply, turn around. We are not going to allow you to come into our country illegally.
The Trump administration's last-minute focus on immigration is reflected by its travel schedule. In the last week, President Trump has stopped at southwestern states Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. In the next 24 hours, Pence will hit 3 more southwestern states, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada.
Oh, we're building.
This border district is unique in that the Democratic candidate is talking tough about border security, too.
We need to secure our borders and enforce our laws against traffickers and violent criminals. And instead of wasting billions on a new border wall or separating families, let's actually fix the process for work visas and provide a pathway to citizenship for those without a criminal record.
But ultimately, for Harrell, this contest isn't just about protecting the border, it's about protecting President Trump from impeachment.
People understand that if we don't hold the House, the Democrats will start an impeachment process.
This cycle, Democrats say they've built their largest battlefield in a decade, and it spans from coast to coast. But right now, with the caravan coming and the midterms less than 2 weeks away, the president and the vice president are concentrating their efforts here in the Southwest. Brett?
Peter Ducey in New Mexico tonight. Peter, thanks. Next, our all-star panel reacts to today's arrest of a man the Justice Department believes had a deadly political agenda.
In an era of online retail where everything...
I am pleased to inform you that law enforcement has apprehended the suspect and taken him into custody.
We will bring the full force of law against anyone who attempts to use threats, intimidation, and outright violence to further an agenda.
Though we're still analyzing the devices in our laboratory, these are not hoax devices. This is very much an active and ongoing investigation. We do believe that we've caught the right guy. Today's arrest doesn't mean we're all out of the woods. There may be other packages in transit now.
Well, the FBI says they have their man making an arrest today, Cesar Sayoc, in Florida. He is being described as a former male stripper. Acquaintances and relatives are telling reporters he used steroids for years. He has a long rap sheet in Florida. 2002, he was sentenced to 1-year probation for making a bomb threat in Miami-Dade County, charged with third-degree grand theft, battery, petty larceny. 2004, charged but never prosecuted for possession of a controlled substance, and then fraudulent refunds and tampering with physical evidence. The van that he lived in, we're told, was taken away, and we saw that live on TV, and you can see the van with the stickers, a lot of political stickers supporting President Trump, Vice President Pence. There are other stickers on there, CNN sucks, and also targeted pictures with a target over Hillary Clinton's face and others. The president was asked about that as he left for Charlotte a short time ago.
I did not see my face on the van. I don't know. I heard he was a person that preferred me over others, but I did not see that. There's no blame. There's no anything. If you look at what happened to Steve Scalise, that was from a supporter of a different party. I think I've been toned down. You want to know the truth. I could really tone it up because, as you know, the media has been extremely unfair to me and to the Republican Party. With all of that being said, we're winning, so I like that.
So what about all of this and the developments? Let's bring in our panel. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Byron.
Well, we now know who the suspect is. He's a strange, unbalanced man, long criminal record, as you said, who adopted the most extreme displays of Trump support. You can see those. I covered a lot of Trump rallies in the campaign. There are some of those people at each rally, most of them, of course, entirely harmless. But there's no doubt that there's politics in this, because not only did he target a number of Democrats or pro-democratic figures, but that the ones targeted were kind of a gallery of Trump villains. Eric Holder, Hillary Clinton, George Soros, Maxine Waters, people who
Robert De Niro.
Exactly. People who had been in highly publicized sort of oppositional arguments with President Trump. So this is going to be a highly politicized argument. But on the other hand, we don't know a lot now specifically about why he says he did what he did.
Let's listen to President Obama a short time ago on the stump, talking kind of around this.
What is at stake is a politics that is decent and honest and lawful and tries to do right by people, and that's worthy of this country we love. It shouldn't be Democratic or Republican to say you don't punish political opponents or threaten the freedom of the press just because you don't like what they say or write about you.
The president has used lines similar to this, but he kind of went down the line of stirring up violence in this speech tonight.
I'm not sure exactly which President Obama was saying that. Well, I think it is something we have seen in recent weeks where there have been these acts taking place from individuals that are threatening, you know, whether it was the ricin attacks of sending that to General Mattis and President Trump, or there was a bomb plot that was diverted that involved Paul Ryan, I think it was just this week, this attack of sending bombs to Democrats. And I think that's very concerning that when individuals do this. It's also disconcerting that we're seeing some larger public embrace of violence or violent rhetoric or incivility. You had Antifa taking over police functions in Portland. You've had some leaders of the Democratic Party call for physical confrontation and incivility. And it's much more worrisome. I mean, you're always going to have people on the left or on the right who behave this way, individuals who are acting alone. I think the country needs to, of course, be vigilant against that, and it's wonderful that the FBI did such a good job with the other law enforcement agencies, but much more disconcerting would be the normalization of political incivility.
I mean, we can come to that conclusion, I think, fairly, that our discourse is a mess. Both parties are to blame. Obviously, the president has the biggest megaphone day to day, and we cover it. He took offense, clearly, that some of the coverage of this leading up to this arrest was pointing directly at him for a day, and tweeted out overnight that Republicans are doing so well in early voting at the polls, and now he first tweeted out about CNN, then they're doing so well in early voting at the polls. Now this bomb stuff happens and the momentum greatly slows. News not talking politics. Very unfortunate what is going on. Republicans go out and vote. He was frustrated by it, which, you know, was attacked all over the place.
You know, I guess it isn't fair in some cosmic sense that the president isn't allowed by some people in their minds to be as mean to the press or his other critics as they are to him. But you know what? It's the reality, and it's always been a part of the role of president that your job is not to, as the president likes to say, when somebody hits you, you hit back twice as hard. Rather, the president's role, at least historically, has been to pour oil on troubled waters in the society, to use soothing rhetoric in times of conflict, to try to soften the political divisions all around us. And so he says people scream at him that he's being unpresidential. I think he is being unpresidential, and it's just never going to happen. I think we've seen enough evidence that President Trump, it just doesn't sort of have it within him to take a moment of extreme tension and calm it. He tends to raise the tensions, and it's getting to the point where, and in no way, shape, or form am I blaming him for this specific act of violence.
But some did over the past day and a half.
I don't want to join them, but what I do think is fair is to look at that White House and say, what has it been doing in the last 18 months? Has it been exacerbating political conflict and or exploiting it? Or has it been consciously trying to soothe it? And I think the answer is pretty clear.
I think it's absolutely true that everyone needs to improve their rhetoric from President Trump on down. He is known for insulting people and his negative discussion of the press. What's unfortunate is the media are very poorly situated right now to talk about improved discourse. They've spent much of the last 2 years openly talking about, having people on air who talk about him as a traitor, who should be impeached. The punishment for treason is actually capital punishment, or that's one of the things you can do. This is incredibly uncivil rhetoric, and it's been going on near daily for a year and a half.
But there is an atmosphere now, and it's not attributable to any one person, but you do have an atmosphere in which these bombs can happen, in which the Republican baseball shooting can happen, in which 5 policemen are murdered in Dallas during the campaign. These things are happening, and we're in one of these periods, and you think back maybe to 1968, in which there were people who worried that the whole country is going to fly off the axle. And we are in one of these periods right now, and I don't think you can attribute, certainly Donald Trump is doing his part, but I don't think you can attribute the whole or even the greatest part to one single person.
One thing we could all agree on was that law enforcement deserves a lot of praise for getting this guy in the short time that they did. Quickly.
Well, I was just going to say, he was mailing out envelopes full of evidence, and they exploited every scrap that was in there.
Next up, immigration politics, possible Putin visit, and this week's winners and losers.
Citizen benefits when we have a strong, beautiful border. As you know, they call it the caravan. It's a big caravan. I called up the military. We're not letting them in. They ought to go back now.
If you do not have a legal right to come to this country, and you come as part of this caravan, and you come in our country, you will be returned home. If they are truly fearing for their lives and they're being persecuted, they don't need to get to the United States. They should be seeking refuge in Mexico.
Homeland Security Secretary with Martha last night. This issue about the border, the caravan, and the administration considering different options. We're back with the panel. Chuck.
Well, you know, this is an extremely difficult dilemma because these people leaving Honduras have a reason to leave Honduras. It's a very violent and impoverished place. But they're not alone in that. There are a lot of countries like that. And there's a dilemma for the United States because the way the courts have interpreted the law, those people have a reason to expect they're going to be able to find their way into the country because once they're captured at the border, they're subject to an asylum process. We all know that, excuse me. But the president, I think, is going to be in a dilemma in terms of actually being able to stop it. And I almost think that he's calling up the military and making all these symbolic gestures to deter the caravan, even though they actually wouldn't work once these folks got to the line, because there's not a whole lot that really can be done
without changing the law. And he did tweet about that, about changing the law.
And there's a limit to what can be done and handled by the executive. This is a problem that is according to our Constitution, best handled through the legislative branch, and both parties are responsible for the failure to have laws that make sense about immigration and how to handle our numbers and how to make sure that what we're doing is matching with the interests of the American people.
I just want to play Vice President Pence on this caravan talking about it.
The media spent a lot of time earlier this week challenging President Trump's statement that there were MS-13 or maybe Middle Easterners in the caravan. While the media was busy going off on it, the Department of Homeland Security issued a report saying, quote, gang members and criminals with significant criminal history are in the caravan, and that includes citizens from, I'm quoting, outside Central America, including the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia that are currently traveling through Mexico toward the United States of America.
Took a couple days, but they got that detail in there from Homeland Security.
Well, if the caravan actually does make it close to the United States border, I mean, the president does have to explore what kind of executive authority he can use about this. He's saying he's going to send U.S. military, not National Guard, active duty military, which still is limited on what it can do inside the United States. It could help operate drones. It could help build fencing and
logistics, and let the Border Patrol do the actual
And by
patrol.
the way, it's another cause for the president to say, you know, having a barrier along large parts of the U.S. border would be a pretty good idea. If you don't like the wall word, just call it a barrier.
I want to get to winners and losers quickly. Good idea, bad idea, Russia, Putin coming to Washington.
John Bolton delivered a very tough message, which it'll probably get amplified if Putin comes over.
We have important arms deals to work out and a host of issues around the world. It's good to be talking.
Yeah, I think they got to discuss this INF thing. If it can be salvaged, it would have to be at the highest levels.
Winner and loser.
My winner this week is Andrew Gillum, who is the Democratic candidate for governor in Florida, who gave a pretty sharp performance in his debate with Republican Rick DeSantis. I think the phrase, "a hit dog will holler," has now permanently entered the American political lexicon, and he's on his way to winning that race, according to the polls. My loser of the week is Bob Menendez of New Jersey, the Democratic senator who has had his race marked down to a toss-up by the Cook Political Report. He should be cruising in this blue state, and instead, he's dragging on the whole ticket.
Winner or loser?
Hurts me to say this because I'm a huge Dodgers fan in the World Series, but the Boston Red Sox had a great couple of games, and they're my winners for the week, although I hope Dodgers can even things out here soon. Loser is the European Human Rights Commission, which ruled this week it upheld the conviction of an Austrian woman who had been found to have improperly disparaged Islam. The European Human Rights Commission said that she did not have free speech rights that allowed her to do that. That's very worrisome about the situation.
That was a big story. Really wasn't covered a lot. Winner and loser?
Two winners, Jeff Sessions and Christopher Wray. Both have taken a real beating over the last several months, but this afternoon we got them to see them doing what the Justice Department and the FBI do the best, which is catching bad guys, and we should all be grateful for the work that they did. The loser is Michael Avenatti. Things not going well for the Stormy Daniels lawyer. Last week, judge threw out his defamation suit against the president. This week, ordered to pay $5 million to his former firm, evicted for unpaid rent, and now the Senate Judiciary